Look at this photograph, a daguerreotype taken in 1851. A funeral portrait of an infant named Rosalie Delacroix, laid in a small white casket lined with silk. Standard post-mortem portraiture for the period, except for one detail that should not exist. There is a second child behind the casket, standing upright, partially obscured by the casket's raised lid. A child who, according to every surviving record from the Delacroix household, was not present in the room when this exposure was made. A child who, according to the parish registry of Sainte-Geneviève-des-Bois, did not exist at all. This is case file 23 of the Forbidden Archive. What follows is a 4-pass forensic analysis of a single image. 1 daguerreotype, 1 anomaly, no resolution. Pass 1. Objective image description. The daguerreotype measures approximately 1/6 plate, roughly 2 3/4 inches by 3 1/4 inches, housed in a union case with a geometric thermoplastic cover. The plate shows moderate tarnish, consistent with silver-mercury amalgam degradation over 170 years. Center frame, the casket. White lacquered pine. Interior lining appears to be ivory or cream-colored silk, gathered in a ruched pattern typical of mid-century French funerary craft. The infant, Rosalie, is positioned supine, hands folded over a small bouquet of dried flowers, likely helichrysum. Her eyes are closed. Her skin tone, rendered in the daguerreotype's silver tones, appears consistent with post-mortem lividity, having been cosmetically addressed. Now, behind the casket, in the upper left quadrant of the plate, partially occluded by the raised casket lid, there is the figure of a second child. The figure is standing. The head and shoulders are visible above the lid. The face is turned approximately 15 degrees toward the camera. The exposure is sharp enough to distinguish individual features: dark hair, parted centrally, a high-collared garment, and eyes that appear to be open and directed at the lens. The child appears to be between 4 and 6 years of age. The Delacroix family had only one child, Rosalie, born February 9th, 1851. Died March 2nd, 1851. 21 days old. No siblings. No cousins in the household. No servants' children documented on the premises. The second child behind the casket has no identity. Pass 2. Documentation associated with the photograph. The daguerreotype was commissioned by Henri Delacroix, Rosalie's father, from a traveling daguerreotypist named Émile Fauchet. Faucher's ledger, preserved in the Municipal Archive of Corbeil-Essonnes, contains the following entry from March 4th, 1851. Quote, 1 post-mortem portrait, infant female, Delacroix residence, Rue de la Paroisse. Single plate exposed. Exposure time approximately 70 seconds. Room contained: the father, the mother, the deceased. No other persons present. Plate developed on site. Client expressed satisfaction. End quote. No other persons present. Faucher's notation is unambiguous: 3 living adults, 1 deceased infant. That is all. But there is a second document. In 1853, 2 years after the photograph was taken, Henri Delacroix filed a sworn affidavit with the local magistrate. The affidavit was part of a dispute with Faucher over an unpaid balance, but it contains a passage that has nothing to do with money. Quote, upon examining the finished plate on the evening of its creation, I observed behind the casket of my daughter the likeness of a child I did not recognize. I inquired of my wife whether any child had entered the room. She stated that none had. I returned to the daguerreotypist the following morning and demanded an explanation. He examined the plate with a magnifying lens and became visibly distressed. He offered to produce a second exposure at no charge. I declined. The image, whatever its nature, was the only portrait of my daughter, and I would not surrender it. End quote. Facher became visibly distressed. A professional daguerreotypist, a man who understood the chemistry and optics of his medium, could not explain the second child behind the casket. Pass 3. Escalation through measurement. In 1978, the daguerreotype was examined by a conservation team at the Musée Nicéphore-Niepce in Chalon-sur-Saône. Their report, catalogued as Restoration File R-78-41, includes spectrographic analysis of the plate surface, the mercury deposits forming the image of the infant, and the casket show a uniform distribution pattern consistent with a single, continuous exposure. The mercury deposits forming the image of the second child also show a uniform distribution pattern consistent with a single, continuous exposure. The same exposure. There is no evidence of double exposure, no evidence of plate manipulation, no chemical discontinuity between the region containing the second child and the surrounding image field. The conservation report contains a handwritten annotation in the margin, initialed by the lead conservator, Dr. Marguerite Voss. It reads, quote, "Figure behind casket is integral to original exposure. No mechanism of post-production insertion identified. Anomaly unresolved." End quote. In 2003, the plate was re-examined using X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy. The analysis confirmed Voss's finding, but it added one detail that the 1978 team had not measured. The optical density of the second child's figure is approximately 12% lower than the optical density of the other elements in the frame. 12%. This is consistent with a figure that was present for the full 70-second exposure, but was reflecting slightly less light than the surrounding objects, as if it were standing in the same room, under the same light, but was not entirely, materially there. Pass 4. Attempted explanations. The simplest hypothesis, a neighborhood child wandered into the room during the exposure, stood still for 70 seconds, then left. This is contradicted by both Facher's ledger and Delacroix's sworn affidavit. Both state explicitly that no other persons were present. The second hypothesis, an artifact of the daguerreotype process itself. Mercury vapor condensation can produce phantom shapes under certain conditions, but phantom shapes from mercury irregularities are amorphous, cloud-like, lacking anatomical structure. The second child behind the casket has a face, has hair with a visible part, has a collar with a discernible fold pattern. Mercury artifacts do not produce collar fold patterns. The third hypothesis, proposed by a photographic historian in 2012. The image is a latent residue from a previous exposure on the same plate. Daguerreotype plates were sometimes repolished and reused. If the previous image was of a child, a faint remnant could theoretically persist. This was tested. The X-ray fluorescence data from 2003 shows no evidence of a prior image layer beneath the current exposure. The plate was not reused. The second child is not a ghost of a previous photograph. It is part of this photograph, part of this single, verified, 70-second exposure in a room that contained 3 adults and 1 dead infant and nothing else. There is one final detail. In 2018, a digital enhancement of the daguerreotype was produced at high resolution. The enhancement revealed something in the second child's hands that had not been clearly visible before. The child behind the casket is holding a small bouquet of dried flowers. The same dried flowers, helichrysum, that are resting in the hands of the dead infant Rosalie in the casket below. The daguerreotype remains in a private collection. The second child behind the casket has never been identified. The flowers have never been explained. If you look at this photograph and you see the second child, I want to know, what do you think she is waiting for? Tell me in the comments. This has been Case File 23. The Forbidden Archive remains open.